Welcome everyone to Stand Up for Lower Merion and Narberth's Hot Topic meeting. Our little subtitle is Trying to Find Compromise, and hey, there's a primary on Tuesday. So we're gonna start out with the boring civic stuff first and then get into the meat of it. There is a primary on Tuesday. And all registered voters, even though PA is a closed primary state, all registered voters can vote in this primary because there's questions on the ballot. And hold on for 1 second. Annie, I just made you co-host, so you can bring people in. So everybody can vote on Tuesday. Democrats get a Democratic ballot, and let's share the screen on that. Democrats get a Democrat ballot that has all your candidates on it. This one happens to be for Narberth, and it also has the ballot questions. Republicans get one with all the Republican candidates. Let's go here. Let's do a Lower Merion one. So go to Google Monco Voter Services, and you'll be able to find your ballot for your precinct. And this is the Republican one. And an interesting thing about certain positions is that district magisterial justice, school directors, and Court of Common Pleas people can do something called cross-filing, and we've covered that in another previous thing. But that means that Nicole Phillips, who is really a Democrat, is here on the Republican ballot because Court of Common Pleas, school director, and magisterial justice are, in theory, nonpartisan positions. Over here under school director, Mary Brown is actually a Democrat. She's the only one that did cross-file. Let's go back to here. Here on the Democratic ballot, Christina Fink, Anna, Kimberly, Melanie, Mary, and Kerry are the Democrats. There, the other three are Republicans. So that's another interesting fact about your ballot. And again, there are the questions. Now, if we go back here and look at the nonpartisan ballot, you'll see that the questions are there. So everybody gets to vote in this primary. So don't be shy, come on out to vote. If you're in my precinct, I'm the judge of elections in the 8-2. And if you have, I'm just going to not go into a whole bunch here, but I just wanted to let everybody get an idea of what they'll be looking at when they go to vote if you haven't done your mail-in ballot. And also, there are some polling location changes in Lower Merion. Lower Merion 5-1 is at the school administration building. 7, 2, and 3 are now at Penguin School instead of Torah Academy, not Torah Academy, Bethel, because it's a Jewish holiday right now. And 6-2 moved to Bryn Mawr Presbyterian. I'm reading them because I think it might be too small on your screens. And Lower Merion 8-2 and 8-3 have moved to Merion Elementary School, and that's because of construction. So I think those are the main things, unless somebody has a question.
One of the ones moved to the district administration office. There's going to be 3 there now instead of 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which hold on.
That's
5-1.
5-1.
Yeah, I know 5-2 and 5-3 are usually there.
There. Mm-hmm.
How I remember these things, I have no idea, but I can't remember one thing from 1 minute to the next. Also,
Adrian,
yeah,
another question just to clarify, the 4 ballot questions,
yes.
this is a primary, but it's not a primary for those ballot questions, correct? They're not
Exactly.
going to be
Good
back
point.
again in
Yes,
the general.
that is a very good point. The ballot questions that you vote on now, if they're approved, they become part of our Constitution. You won't see them again in November. This is like it for them. So it's really important that everybody turn out and vote on those questions, especially no on the first 2, because it disrupts the balance of power, and it takes the executive branch and the legislative branch higher and the executive branch lower. So that is one of the things that we want to make sure that everyone does. Okay, so now I want to get into the meat of this. And we did say that the independent voters can vote for the ballot questions. So if as long as you're registered to vote, you can vote this time. Thank you, Annie. I think I could say that 400 times and people will then forget, but that's okay. All right, so what I want to do is introduce Lucy Klain, president of the Lower Merion School District Board of Directors. I also would like to introduce Andy Garvin, who is a commissioner in Ward 6, right?
Correct.
Got my numbers right. And we're here to try and find a little common ground on the issue of the middle school and the fields. I know everything is up in the air right now. And if I could get like couple minute intro loose on the school district's position, and then Andy on the township position, and then we'll continue on from there and take questions from the floor and so on. It's nice because we have a couple of candidates on the call. We also have Peter Lee, who's a current school director, and Sean Kremer, who's running for Ward 8 commissioner. So that's nice. We have a nice showing. So, okay.
All right. So I'll just start with a brief background. Many of you, maybe all of you already know this information, but I thought sort of a little bit of a context. So you probably know that we're building we're building a new middle school. I'll start there. We're building a new middle school because our enrollment is growing. These are kids that are already in our schools, and we need somewhere to educate them. We also heard, as our schools were growing, that the community, various school communities, didn't want their own schools to be bigger, the elementary schools to get bigger. And that was part of the decision of finding and building a 3rd middle school. And part of that comes along with a switch in curriculum or educational philosophy in terms of our elementary schools will now be K-4, and our middle schools, and we will have 3 middle schools, 6 elementary, 3 middle, that will be 5 through 8, and we'll continue to have our 2 high schools. So you probably all also knows that there's not a lot of large parcels of land in the township. Looking at number of areas, we ended up purchasing 1860 Montgomery Avenue to build the new middle school. It's the old Islamic Education Center. one of the downsides to that particular property is that it's not big enough to house all the fields or, sort of everything that we need for the middle school. And our goal really is to be able to provide students with a full complement of extracurricular activities. One piece of data that I wanted to put out there, because I know there's been some misinformation on Facebook, is that per our school principals, 60% of our middle school students participate in at least one sport. There are a number of students that participate in multiple sports, but at least 60% of our students at the middle school level participate in one sport, and it's slightly lower, between 55 and 58% at the high school level. So it is a large number, or percent of our kids that are participating. So we acquired 1860. We're building the school. We're in that process. In fact, there's a topping off ceremony sort of to kick off the actual building of the school in June. So as part of that, we sort of then needed to find additional space for fields. And we eventually paid about $13 million for the contiguous properties at 1800 West Montgomery and 1835 County Line. So the school is usually referred to as 1860, and then the fields are usually referred to as 1835. Those had both been offered for sale by their owners. So we all know that this location isn't ideal, but realistically, space is very limited in our sort of inner ring suburb. So I think it's important to note that we looked at many different sites for playing fields. So it's not as if this was like, this is where absolutely we want to be. We looked at Spring Mill, a property on Spring Mill Road, but that contained wetlands. We looked at Stoneleigh, but that obviously, I think everyone knows what happened with that. We have since, Andy and Peter and Ray Courtney and I have been meeting pretty regularly. We met again 2 times, I believe, with Natural Lands Trust, and sort of put up there, is there a land swap that's available, between Stoneleigh and 1835? And they came back and said, you know what, there really isn't an option that would significantly or to any extent decrease the number of trees that would be removed. So that sort of took that off the table. Ashridge Park was looked at, but there are deed restrictions around how it was deeded to the township. It has to do with what types of activities you can have there. I can tell you that the lawyers, both on the district side and the township side, are revisiting that. It was originally part of the conversation around for a space for the middle school, now revisiting, looking at it as space for potential playing fields. The issue there is around what would happen if the township, the issue with the deed is that it stipulates that there can't be group activities. There can't be group sports on that site. And so the lawyers on either side are re-looking at the whole thing again to see if there's any opportunity there.
If they can take the barns.
I know nothing about the barns property, I'll be honest. In terms of like what size it is and things like that. So the township also reached out to Haverford Township on behalf of using the polo fields, which I want to note, the polo fields are entirely in Delaware County and part of Haverford Township. They are not within Lower Merion or even Montgomery County. My understanding was that the original conversations were about purchasing that land, which didn't go anywhere. The township is sort of re-entering conversations with Haverford Township again, looking at opportunities around perhaps there could be a long-term, scheduling guarantees or things like that. So it's sort of as a follow-up, we know that there are other alternate properties that have been suggested. At this point, none of them have come really to be viable or available, although there are ongoing conversations. Andy and Ray and I and Peter met last week and talked about some other opportunities. But I just want to point out that, we all know that 1835 isn't the perfect piece of land. 1860 wasn't the perfect piece of land, but a lot of sort of the alternatives that we're looking into come with their own impact, whether it's additional buses and busing of kids, longer distances from school and their homes. And I think it would be negligent to not at least acknowledge that there are costs and other impacts when we start looking at other places. So example is the potential use of the polo fields. If you've ever been there, you know that the parking lot is not conducive to buses. It's barely conducive to cars. So if we were to bus students there, the bus pickup and drop off, possibly even parking during games and practices, wouldn't be through that parking lot, but probably in front of Haverford Township homes. So, and we all know that no one likes buses anywhere they're near their homes. You know, our community has made that pretty clear to the district. And now we would be moving forward with a plan where we are expected to have the buses near homes of students that don't even, you know, they don't even attend Lower Merion schools. And I'm not mentioning this to say it's a non-starter. I'm just mentioning it because I think we all need to acknowledge that there are other challenges and drawbacks that would come with other opportunities and what other options. So I'm not sure, Adrian, where you'd like us to go next, whether you want sort of Andy to give a little bit. I have some more stuff I could say. We can go through some of the lists of things that we're talking about.
Let's let Andy give us a little bit from the perspective of the commissioners and the zoning, and something I've been trying to find out for about a month now is where are all the township and properties? So maybe he can help get that information. Not right now, but.
Right. So actually, I'm sorry, Andy, can I just, I'm going to address that just a little bit really quickly. I just wanted to note that all of our secondary schools already have at least one athletic team, sometimes more, that go to other sites, whether it goes to a different school, like we use Penn Valley and Gladwin for various sports, but they also use township. We have relationships with the township where, you know, especially around baseball, they'll go to, you know, Lower Merion High School baseball and softball play at South Ardmore Park. So there are already is already a lot of use by the district of township facilities. So I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to add that in.
Not at all. So first of all, Adrian, thank you very much for inviting us and kind of having this forum, and thanks to everybody, because this really has been the community has truly stepped up, not only with sharing what concerns they have, but with solutions as well, which has been incredibly helpful. I know I've gotten, you know, list of ideas. Some have been looked into, some are not feasible, but some are things that need to be looked into as well. And I think the challenge here is, and Lucy put it well, that this site was not an ideal site. So, you know, already off the bat, this was a compromise. And the school district, you know, moved forward with it because it was the best of the opportunities that they had. But with it comes compromises. And I think when we come up with a solution, there's going to have to be, for the fields, there's going to have to be compromises on all sides, right? It's not, we're not going to magically find, you know, a 20-acre, you know, farmland that's a half a mile from the school that's going to be able to fit all of the fields and everything we need. It's just, that's not how Lower Merion's laid out. It's not how our properties are. And Adrian, to your question, a lot of the parks and the township-owned properties are on the eastern end of the township. The school is on the western, very much on the western end of the township. And, you know, in the conversations, as Lucy's mentioned, the conversations we've had, and I don't disagree, that busing kids from the new middle school all the way down to Bala Kinwood or Penwyn or whatever it might be to do their after-school sports probably isn't the right solution, right? That you're on the bus now a half an hour each way for maybe an hour or an hour and 15-minute long practice. Yeah.
So kids from Penwyn will be bused to the western end of the township. So if they're playing sports, then on the eastern end, they'll be closer to home.
But they may have to bus back to the school for after practice, is my understanding. And Lucy, I'll let you talk to that.
So it depends. So for those families who have a parent at home that have that have a parent that can come pick them up after a practice or a game, then yeah, then that is definitely a positive. But we do, and we need to, especially at the middle school level, provide busing. So there are two ways to look at it, and I don't know which way would be the better way, or what's, what would work.
We all understand that this is complicated. Okay.
Right. So if you were at Penguin, so we provide late buses to the schools, right? So that if you participate, you get a bus home as well. And not a lot of districts do that. I will say not a lot of districts do that, but it is a better and more equitable way to do it, so that we don't have families who, live in South Ardmore, their kids are at Penn Valley, or at Welsh, their kids are at Welsh Valley, and the student wouldn't be able to participate in after school sports because they wouldn't have a way to get home. Right. So we provide late buses. So then the question is, would you bus those kids? So let's say we were at the seminary, would you bus them back to the middle school and then have your late buses all go out from there? Or would you have to add an extra set of late buses for those kids that would provide busing to, the kids that are close to there, but not necessarily walking distance, and those kids that live in Gladwin and Villanova, right? So you're either adding an extra set of after school buses, or you're busing them all back to the middle school for that set of after school buses.
So and I brought that up, just, the point is that there isn't this elegant solution that's out there, and we're trying to reach a compromise that works for the township, that works for the residents, that works for the school district. And the solution that's come up that ultimately we figure out is not going to be one that everybody is 100% thrilled with. We're going to have to figure it out and work through it. But it also, there are certain things that each party feels is incredibly important, and we need to make sure that the solution for these fields meets all of these needs. And the school district has submitted their plan for the fields at 1835 County Line and 1800 Montgomery. It's been delayed twice, so we haven't had a public hearing on it yet, but the staff reviewed it, and I believe a staff memo went out before the plan was ultimately tabled. But there were some real deficiencies that the township felt with that plan. One being, as has kind of been very clearly made, the number of trees that are being cut down and the inability to replant those trees and replace what's lost from those trees on site. And two, and something that I don't want to get lost as well, is there's also some real neighborhood concerns. And this isn't, and I'm very wary of NIMBY type issues. This isn't an issue of not in my backyard, because the neighborhood has been incredibly supportive of both having the school here and having the fields here. But there's a level of disruption that, the feeling has been that this has gone just, beyond what's acceptable for the neighborhood. So there needs to be some balance there. There's a third piece as well that was brought up during tentative sketch and has gone back and forth with, not only are there, these historic majestic trees on the property, there are also these historic buildings. Now, they were never classified and they are not protected as class 1 or class 2 historic buildings, but they are all still beautiful and important buildings that the school district is not required to keep by law. There's no protection for those buildings because they were never designated, because they were on private property and really never thought of to add to the historic registry, but they are historic buildings. So you have the trees, you have the buildings, you have the neighborhood concerns, which is, raised a lot of issues with the plan that was submitted to put all of the necessary fields on the site. So so what Lucy and Peter and Ray and I have been meeting about is, how can you offload some or all of these fields, or how do you come up with that solution that solves some of these problems and creates a better solution for the township that still meets the school district's needs, but one that really is a better solution than what we currently have in front of us. And that's really where we are. And as Lucy said, we've been meeting about it. We've been kind of bouncing ideas back and forth on some of the potential solutions. But certainly open to more questions, more thoughts, more ideas from people, because there are a lot of potential options out there.
So to follow up on that, there's the mansion that's on the property is designated a level 2 historic, and that is going to stay. And then there are other sort of not accessory structures, but other structures that are also on that property. The district has offered to Natural Lands Trust if they would like those those structures, that they are welcome to them. I know that someone has looked at how would you move them and how does that work and how much would it cost? And I don't know any of those details, but I know that has been considered and that has been offered. So I'll put that out there. And so one of the things that Andy just alluded to was this idea of moving some of the fields off of that property. And so I don't know if I can explain this well, but I will try. Right now, the way the fields are set up there's a softball field, and sort of there's almost 2 sets of fields, it's separated in 2. There's softball with a half field and a regulation field, like a full field. And then there's baseball field and a half field, like a practice field, and then a full regulation size field. And so when we've been discussing that, we've sort of talked about them as pods, P-O-D. I had a conversation with someone and wasn't quite sure what I was saying. So pods, so that you sort of had a softball pod and a baseball pod. And the reason I think that that's important to mention is when people think about different sites and they see a piece of property or they see a park and they're like, oh, that would be a great place for fields. I mentioned that baseball because baseball is actually one of the hardest fields to place and to find space for, because it's actually quite large. A middle school baseball field is actually the same size as a high school baseball field, a college baseball field, and apparently a Major League Baseball field, right? So it's a fairly large. We already use for our schools the existing baseball fields that the township has that are those sizes. So when you see a lot of the fields, the baseball fields around the township, a lot of them are not full regulation sort of school size. They're more little league size. They're called 50-70 versus 60-90. And so I mentioned that just because I want to just put out there that really that's the size field that or property that we're looking for. And I think it's something like 320 feet just for the field itself, 320 feet from home base to on the outfield, and then sort of center field. It's I think 360 or 370, and then there's some weird thing about the line between the batter and the pitcher and which way it faces. I think because it can't face directly into the sun. Yeah. So there's something about that sort of regulation on how you set that up.
Let's take some questions because we're after 3 o'clock now. And Sean McMurtry.
Hi.
Did I say your name right?
You did, Sean McMurtry.
I left out the R.
Great.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So it's good to hear that we're already using township fields for sports. That means we can continue to do that. So I went to I spent all morning yet again today, countless hours of my life, and I speak for so many people trying to find a solution. And my stress is out of control about this. So there is a list of 9 parks. When you go to lowermerion.org, under parks, there are 9 parks with baseball fields. So immediately, and you can click on each one of those fields to see the size. And the first thing that hit me is Penguin is being leased to Baldwin for 15 years. Baldwin apparently drives 4.4 miles to the Penguin field when the Richie, what is it called? Ashburn
Yeah.
is 0.4 miles down Montgomery, so are we looking at, are we speaking with Marissa Porges at the Baldwin School to get that field back?
So I think that's a really interesting idea. There was an agreement, like you said, I think it was about 5 years ago, give or take, with Baldwin, where they did some renovations to that field, you know, and in exchange they received the right to use it. Now it's a softball field. It's a 60-foot. So there's two types
it's a
of
60
baseball fields. There's the 60-foot bases from home to first base is 60 feet. That's for softball. That's for Little League baseball. For middle school and high school above baseball, it's 90 feet. So while that might help in terms of a softball field, it would not solve a problem for a baseball field. And I think, Sean, to your question, a lot of those fields that are listed as baseball fields are softball. So I know Richie Ashburn is 60 feet, not 90 feet. But we are, with that said, we are looking at, is there an opportunity to take any of those and expand them? And, you know, is there enough space to make those a 90-foot field, and you reskin the field and you clean it up and you can potentially turn it into a 90-foot field. And, you know, I'll give as an example, at Gladwin Park, right by Gladwin Elementary, there's two fields that are kind of side by side. There's a baseball field with a 90-foot diamond, and I believe the Harridan JV baseball team plays there. And there's also a softball field. Now they overlap, so they can't be used at the same time, but is there an opportunity? And you run into some hills and topographical issues. Can you put kind of fields back to back where you can have both of those as 90-foot instead of a 90 and a 60-foot and play them at the same time? So I think it's a great question and something we should look at. And I'm glad you pointed that out with Baldwin, to potentially move Baldwin, and then if that can help solve the problem. But I think the bigger and more general point is looking at all of those fields and seeing if any of those 60-foot fields can be turned into a 90-foot field, to solve that problem. And that's something we are looking at, and we're, you know, continuing to look at that as well.
Great. And just a quick follow-up to that, Andy, did you get my email this morning? Did you
Yes,
see
I did.
Yeah, because there is a plethora of other options.
Yeah, I did. And thank you for that. And you know, you mentioned this in that email as well, and I appreciate that. And that's
Wonderful.
something we're going to look at.
Great.
Okay.
So I thought that I would take a second to there's some stuff in the chat around baseball field sizes. So it actually is a difference between a 50-70 is the infield. It's that reference to 50-70 has to do with how far the pitching mound is to home plate, and then how far home plate how far the bases are from each other. So there actually is a difference. It's not just the outfield piece of it, it is internal. And there was a question about why don't we just have our middle schools play on a smaller field, because then they wouldn't be able to play with the other schools. There are PIAA regulates that. So and actually, as those kids get older and they're playing in travel leagues and things like that, it's a different size that they would be playing otherwise. And so you've got issues with your pitchers. And I know that this is all like detail, but sports is important to a lot of people, right? And it's important to those families. There was a question of why not just have middle school, like one Lower Merion middle school, because we have a lot of kids, and there's only 18 kids on a baseball team, and already there are cuts. And so then you're just really decreasing the number of kids that can participate. And we know that a lot of kids want to participate. So from an educational perspective, we want to provide that same opportunity to all of our schools. So, and that to me as a parent, to me as a school board member, I think that's really important. There was a question about using Welsh Valley Middle School as a complex for all of our schools. Actually, Welsh Valley Middle School uses all of those fields. There aren't extra fields that aren't being used at Welsh Valley. So when I said earlier that all of our secondary schools go to other facilities, so Welsh Valley, they have enough outdoor fields that they use, and they use everything that's on that property. It's their wrestling team that actually goes to Bala-Cynwyd. So that's so those fields at Welsh Valley are being used. So I wanted to address some of those things that were in chat.
Yeah, or Sola, those.
Yes,
I killed your name, I'm sorry.
You're not the first one. Austria, I understand that it's a difficult situation. For piggybacking onto like other properties that could be used, I was wondering if the property that township owns that's across from Richie Ashburn Field, next to Stone Lane Swim Club, if that has been looked at, because talking to the person at the swim club, it's not being used other than for overflow parking, and it's being mowed, it's using resources, and it's not really doing much. The other property that I'm looking at, just looking at satellite images without knowing who's owning it, is that there's a big open space close to the Shipley School fields on Youngsford near Waverly Road. I assume that it's an open space from a development based on where it's located. That seems like a big piece of open land that could be.
Is that the farm?
Is that the field that Shipley owns?
No, it's across the street. So there's a Shipley field, and then further on Youngsford on the opposite side of Waverly, there's a couple of houses and then a big open grass area that it doesn't look like it's labeled on the satellites. I don't know who owns that property.
There's a housing community there. That's all I know about that.
Yeah.
But that, yeah, so
There's a farm preserve out
So
there.
I wonder if it's part of the plan, the open space preserve that could be looked at and used, because it's already just lawn or green space without trees. So the environmental value is not close to what the
right, I
forest
see what you're
that's
saying.
being cut down would
Yeah.
be.
But yes,
I know.
oh.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that the one down by Richie Ashburn and Stony Lane is on the list of properties that are being looked at.
Because that's not being taken advantage of the way that it's taking resources, but it's not being used at this point.
Yeah,
My other question is has the school district come up with the numbers of how many students are actually using each separate field at each sports season? Like, do we actually know the exact number of students using those fields and how many? Because building another middle school sounds like we are, giving 50% more school, but we're not actually adding 50% more students to the school district. The capacity, the enrollment is already high, and it's not going up that much based on the enrollment projections. I don't know, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but we are pretty close to maxing out, and maybe adding another 10%, 20% of students. I'm not sure the numbers at this point, but why are we adding 50% more sports fields when the student using those fields is not actually 50% more? So the resources that we're spending on these fields, I'd like to see the numbers of exact number of students using those fields. And you mentioned 18 students per baseball field. That seems like an awful lot of money spent for an extra 18 students to use fields.
Okay, so a couple of things. It's not actually 50% more. We have we have 3 middle schools, right? So you could say it's 33% more, right? Because we are going from 2 middle schools to 3.
Yeah, so it's 50%.
The district could say, I guess it depends on how you're looking at it, sure. So the difficulty with saying X number of kids play this sport is that it's cyclical. It ebbs and flows. This year there might be more kids, next year there might be fewer kids, right? So it's hard to say, okay, let's look at it from this year. And I actually have pushed back on this, right? Because I'm trying to figure out exactly how many teams we have, and it changes year to year. So for example, this year for girls lacrosse at Lower Merion High School, there's varsity, JV-A, and JV-B. Often there's, sometimes depending on the sport, there can be varsity, JV, and freshmen, but it depends on how many freshmen are coming in. And if you don't have, if you have more sophomores than freshmen, you might make a JV-B team, right? So, but that's this year. But last year, there wasn't a JV-B team, there were 2 teams. So, and next year it might be different again, because this year's senior class happens to be big of lacrosse players. So, and it changes from whether they choose Lower Merion versus Harriton, or they choose Harriton instead of Lower Merion. So it's not, it's not as easy to say, okay, we specifically have X number of teams at each school that do this, right? We look at it, so as a school board member, my role is not to say you should have X number of teams. It's not to say you should have this, your school day should be set up like this. The school board's role is to say, we want to make sure that we have a robust extracurricular program, and it's the administration's job, because they're the experts in what that looks like, to get that done, right? So in terms of knowing exactly how many teams, it's a little bit too fluid.
No,
And
I understand
we also know that we,
Can I jump
the
in?
district doesn't have any fields.
Go ahead.
Oh, Peter, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the sort of underlying questions is, we're not increasing the enrollment by 50%. Why is there a 50% increase in field space? Because the number of teams is actually increasing by 50%. So because we're adding a middle school, that school is going to have a full complement of sports, and so requires fields to house those kids. You know, the question about the field utilization and the percentage utilization of each field, you know, we can certainly ask to have more, you know, concrete numbers put to that. As Lucy said, it's tricky because the number of teams is a little bit fluid, but we do know that scheduling the fields at our existing middle schools is tricky because of sports overlap and season overlap and the number of teams. So it's not like fields are going unused currently. We don't have the number of fields to house the 2 middle schools that are existing.
I
Even though
understand, but
there are
we're
fields at those
spending
sites.
$13 million just for buying the land, and that's not even developing it. I would like to see numbers of what's supporting the need for all that. The other thing is the equity issue of having the similar schools, having similar sports fields. With this development, this middle school will have more fields than any other middle school that we have in the township. So then you can go ahead and say, well, the other middle schools don't have the field, so we need to add more to those. So the equity issue is not supported in my mind, and I don't think that is just.
That's not a.
Sorry,
true
I don't think it's
statement.
justified to.
The school will have more. I just wanted to address that because, you know, there's this notion floating around that this school is going to have more field space than the other schools, and that's just not true. The amount of acreage devoted.
I looked at the numbers.
I'm happy to share the square footage of field space at each middle school when the development is done. I'm happy to share that with you. And the amount of field space available for this middle school will be roughly the same as the amount of field space for Welsh Valley. And we already know that the Welsh. Go ahead.
I was going to say one of the problems in finding baseball field and softball field space isn't so much 60 or 90 feet. It's the fact that these fields are pie shaped and therefore harder to find. But, you know, the professional baseball players don't always play on pie shaped fields. Willie Mays spent half his professional career in a rectangular field at the Polo Grounds. And Fenway Park is a peculiar shape. It's not a good shape for baseball. So they have a high wall in left field because there is no left field space for them. So, you know, if professional teams can compromise, I think 11-year-olds, middle school kids can compromise and still learn how to play baseball, even if the field isn't ideally shaped.
I'd like to call on Terry Simon because she had a couple things in the chat and she was like actually next. But that was a good point, Richard.
Thank you, Adrian. I appreciate that. Lucy addressed one of the questions that I had because I'm very sensitive to the acreage schools are on, because I understand that Penn Elementary School is on 5-point-something acres. And I at one point had all the acreage memorized. And I know that Welsh Valley is on 33 acres. And I know what Lower Merion is. I know what Harrington is. Harrington has the biggest number of acres. Welsh Valley has the second largest number of acres. And I have never understood two things. One, why there, and Lucy, you did try to address my question, and I appreciate that, but I've never understood why, number one, there wasn't a better use of the acreage at Welsh Valley. I didn't understand, having lived through the demolition and construction of Lower Merion High School, which went very well, mostly because of Pat Gannan, who was terrific, that it is possible to take down a school, build another school, and do it with the least amount of disruption, both to the student body and to the neighborhood. So I never understood why the school district didn't have that as an option, building a larger middle school at Welsh Valley. That's number one. Number two, but that's done. But that's always been a kind of pet peeve of mine. The next thing I've always wondered is, I've watched for the last 20 years as Rock Hill Road, the Rock Hill Road corridor has lain fallow. I mean, there's now a development, whatever development at the corner of Belmont and Rock Hill Road. And I guess that's a positive thing, because, aside from the CVS, for the last 20 years, there's been this notion that Rock Hill Road corridor was going to be the gateway to Lower Merion, and it didn't turn out to be that. There is already kind of prepared ground there. And I know nothing about what a school district needs in terms of size of fields, but it seems to me that fallow corridor could be used in a creative way. I talked to Chris Lessing about this years ago, that had the district been willing to build up, a middle school could have been created there if the district had been willing to build up, which it was not. But I never understood why that Rock Hill Road corridor, which has, to my untrained eye, a tremendous amount of space, hasn't been considered for a field complex. Because it seems like if the district is going to pay $13 million for I believe it's called the 1835 property, that there might have been, if there had been consideration of that fallow corridor, that there might have been a real opportunity to have a field complex on Rock Hill Road. And that just didn't ever seem to be part of the consideration. And there are no trees. I mean, it's at the base of a quarry. There are no trees that would have had to be taken down. There are no historic structures there. And I just don't understand why these kinds of ideas don't percolate up and get the attention of the district.
Peter,
thanks, Adrian.
So if I could answer. So there are two questions. Well, one statement and now Terry's question. One is about the size of the baseball fields themselves. My understanding is that's all regulated by PIAA. So the district has actually very limited ability to modify those. That's not something that's at discretion. Most of the fields have specific regulations on what the dimensions should be. Obviously not to make, if there was an opportunity to do that, we'd certainly be open to looking at it. But as far as Rock Hill Road corridor, I can say, even, having been someone who has been, observing the district and paying attention and, had a prior run for the school board 10 years ago before being on the school board. The district has always been interested in Rock Hill Road and that corridor, and has made multiple attempts to acquire property on there, and has, sometimes it's been for, various political reasons, has not been available to the school district. And sometimes the developers themselves were just not interested in selling to the school district. So,
you got Peter, with all respect, Peter, I'm going to interrupt because I know you so well, so you won't mind. The district has the power of eminent domain, which it was willing to use on Stoneleigh. So that's when I really began to think about Rock Hill Road, because the power of eminent domain is actually, or was actually, stronger than the power of Brian O'Neill. So who was the owner of Rock Hill, those Rock Hill Road parcels, and now Prudential Insurance Company, if they're still in fact the owner. So I never understood, Peter, why it was that the school district wasn't willing to use its powers of eminent domain on that corridor, because that would have been a productive use for that corridor, would have been much better for the township. And we would have avoided the kind of situation, the scenario we're facing now at 1835 with the denuding of that property of, over 500 trees.
Right. So I wasn't part of the conversation back, when that would have been discussed prior to this middle school, but my understanding is that it was an issue with property value at the time, because that development was still in discussion and the property was valued at $20 to $25 million. And so, you know, there's the $13 million cost of this property. It just was out of, even if we had eminent domain, we would still have had to pay market rates. And at the time, because there was a development that was going to be there, that property was valued much higher than what the district could afford. I think, you know, it's something Peter. That certainly if the, you know, I know the development, the plans for that development has changed. And, you know, if the opportunity presents itself, you know, Lucy and I can assure everyone on this call that if Rock Hill Road would become available or is an option, the district would be interested in that land for a variety of reasons.
Thank you, Peter.
So I do want to point out, though, and so for those of you who don't know me, I'm a devil's advocate by nature, and so my natural inclination is to, like, the way I process information is to take it and sort of pick it apart. I do want to point out sort of one of the things that we've talked about, and Andy mentioned earlier when I hadn't, was this idea that you want property that's kind of sort of near where your middle school is. And surprisingly, that Rock Hill Road corridor is actually farther away from that new middle school than the seminary is, by, like, you know, maybe a quarter of a mile, but still it is like, so that's again a piece of that puzzle. And but yes, and my understanding, and again, I also wasn't part of the conversations Rock Hill Road prior to this, was that to put a school there would have required moving the road somehow, that that was one of the reasons that it I see you shaking your head, Terry. I wasn't part of those conversations.
No,
but that was
it was the verticality issue. It was the building vertical. That's what the issue was.
So there was, sorry.
Am I on? It's Brian Gordon. Lucy, I just wanted to share some thoughts with this. I'm a former township commissioner, and thank you for allowing me to join the call. I was on for 12 years, and to confirm what you said, there was a bizarre hostility to the school district using Rock Hill Road because it had this vision of a gateway for Lower Merion, which was ridiculous because it was a light industrial valley and it would have been perfect. 2 people voted in favor of the school buses on Rock Hill Road, myself and Jenny Brown, just to give you an idea. And we were on the outs on that. But there's one thing that you said is really, really important for going forward. And I see you have some prospective school board members on the call. And that is when you say that the school district are the experts and we as the board are not the experts, you hand over an awful lot of power, of policymaking power to the staff, as opposed to sort of retaining it to yourselves. So the staff needs direction as a board, and I hope I'm not overstepping or overstating, but you have this power to give the staff direction, like saying, look, we want you to find school ground for this, but you can't level a forest. I know it's not a forest, but you can't take a property with 400 to 500 mature trees and take it down for this thing. That's not an option. Think of something else. So if you as a board impose constraints and give the school district, who are essentially your employees, direction, say, please figure it out. Come up with your next 5 options. Let's look at that. I know it's late in the game for this because they already purchased the land, but just in principle, it's really, really important not to overview the staff as the experts and you as the board not knowing enough to really have an opinion.
I don't disagree with that. And I'm sorry if my comments sort of made it seem like, I completely agree. As a board, our role is to say, okay, look at other options or look at it differently. But I will still maintain that the role of the board is not to say you should have only one baseball team versus 2. I do think that there's a sort of a level there in terms of how much a board micromanages. And I do think that role of the board through this whole COVID thing has, COVID really changed sort of, the school board is meant to be a governance board. And with COVID and the need to do these health and safety plans, the governor, for valid reasons, said you need to have these plans in place that were very, very detail oriented, I think made it more difficult in some situations because people started to believe that it was up to the board to say, well, elementary school, you should have these classes at these times. And so I guess that's why I mentioned that, because I think I'm particularly sensitive to it at this time because of everything going on with COVID. But you're right, the board's role is to say, you need to rethink this or look at this a little bit differently. My point was more is like, it's just not very
Right, and I
like
want to say
the
that
detail.
as commissioners, we felt we're just citizens who are elected to this board. We're not automatically experts. You gain this over, a few years of experience, but you can be disempowered by a staff by taking the role of saying, we're the experts. Here are your limited range of options. You have to choose A or B or A, B, and C. So I'm just saying, be the policy board that Lower Merion wants you to be. And I believe you are. I'm not really immersed in school issues that much, only looking at this from the edge, but I just wanted you to make sure you retain that power with the board to really set policy on things that people care about.
It's funny, I've been doing the new superintendent forums, and I've gone to 3 of them, and people are discussing how they want a superintendent that doesn't overpower the board. And I did bring up during one of them that that's the board's fault, not the superintendent's, because the board is supposed to be governance. So I'm just kind of letting you know that it's a bigger issue than just Brian bringing it up. It's something that's throughout. Nancy, do you want to go next? I know we're at an hour, but I think there's too many questions and this is too big an issue. And I'd like that everyone is involved. I'd like that we're bringing options up that, when you think you know everything and thought of everything, when you get more input from other people, it gives you something else to think about, and maybe some good stuff can come from this. Nancy, I think you were next. Brian, would you lower your hand unless you have something? Thanks.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Adrian, thank you for putting this together, and I'd like to thank Peter Lee and Lucy Klain for being here, as well as I see Andy Garvin, and also I've seen Dan Bernheim. So I think this, and the number of people on this call, I think demonstrates the level of concern, deep concern.
On a Sunday afternoon.
On a Sunday afternoon, the deep concern that people have for this proposal. And I have raised, most of our group has been, Climate Action Lower Merion has been, obviously we're trying to find a solution. But one of the things that has not been addressed by any of the policymakers and leaders is having an environmental lens and quality and expectations on environmental issues as a central component to the policy decisions that are being made. Number one, I'd like to make that point. Number two, I'd like to make the point that one of the things that's very clear, the crisis, the existential crisis that our world and our community is facing, comes in part from the decision of people to not make compromises around the amount of resources that they want to use. And they can't imagine that we are stuck in an old way. And it seems to me that several people have made some suggestions about getting creative and trying to find new ways to think about things, and to acknowledge publicly that we cannot continue to provide what we deem to be at all our wants. There's what we want, and then there's what we need. And I don't believe these children's sports education will be compromised if they get a little bit less than the perfect that's been proposed. And I believe there are a lot of people who feel that way, and that it's a lesson for children. And then I guess the last thing I'd like to say is that it's coming, you know, it's coming to us, the need for our community to figure out a different way so that we don't have as big a carbon footprint. And Lower Merion School District, I don't have the facts on it, but probably is the single largest carbon emitter of any entity in Lower Merion Township. And the fact that because of the number of facilities it owns and the number of employees that it has and all of its activities. So when we think about these decisions, where we are now with the level of crisis that we are facing, it is deeply disturbing that issue seems to be ignored. And only it's what is legal that we can do legally. And I don't think that's leadership. And we're looking for leadership. I mean, I just need to say that. Thank you.
Nancy, I want to just thank you for those comments. I think they're really important. And frankly, from a township standpoint, we are behind on it, and we're getting better. We're hiring a sustainability manager in our, for anyone who's listened to township meetings, sustainability and has come up more and more frequently in recent conversations. It is something that we're conscious of. It's something that we need to be better at, but it's something that we're getting there. And I think it's vital in this, in this situation as well. And I'm coming at this as the ward commissioner where the school is, as well as a neighbor. I live in the neighborhood where the school is. And I'm also coming at it as a parent of 3 daughters, 2 who are currently in middle school and 1 who's going to be in middle school in 2 years. And, having these conversations with them about, their minds are boggled at decisions that are being made. And, it's, as I'm thinking about it, it's how do we better utilize the assets we have? And I saw in the comment, there were some questions about this is being done in conjunction with, potentially looking at school start times. Does that open an opportunity to take our current fields and use them twice as frequently, and use them in the morning for before school sometimes, and use them after school for other, for maybe in high school in the morning, middle school at night? And I know there's challenges with that. And I saw in the comments also, that would mean student athletes are getting up a little earlier. So, there's compromises all over, but, that solution that we've talked about, the polo fields before, and those are fields already. And can we take the existing resources we have and use them more efficiently, rather than cutting down trees and rather than doing things where we're impacting the environment to make more of what we have? So I think that's a really important point, and I'm glad you shared that, because it's something I think we all need to be better at, and we're certainly working towards getting there.
Am I on mute?
No, you're.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Nancy.
Adrian, I don't know how to raise my hand on the screen. So
because Linda, you've had a couple things. Phyllis, I'm going to call on her first, and you'll be next. Go ahead, Linda.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I know I've watched you in the chat.
Okay. I've said a lot in the chat. I came here very calm and laid back, and I am really upset right now. I thank Nancy for her eloquent way of expressing how I'm feeling. We don't need perfect. People need to compromise. And I want to piggyback off what the commissioner just said. I don't remember your name.
Andy Garvin.
Andy. I've been in education and I've been in horticulture, and now I'm somehow get thrown into politics. It's not my thing. It's too stressful. But what I want to say is, from what I've heard, and like I said, it's not firsthand, but when you hear it over and over and over and over again, you start to believe it. Although I didn't believe Trump, I promise you. Anyway, there's a problem in this township, and it seems like Because when I go to Board of Commissioners meetings, I hear one thing. And when I go to school board meetings, I hear another thing. And it feels to me like the problem is the lack of cooperation, communication, and relationships between these two bodies. And that why we're in these pickles, all these major problems all the time, is because from what I have heard, and maybe I'm wrong, but what I've heard is that these two bodies fight each other and don't work together to the point of suing one another, using township money to sue each other. I mean, that's, again, it's all second, third-hand information, but there's something wrong here that is bigger than the ball field, that is bigger than a school, and it's the community. And I just need to say that. Thank you.
Okay.
You're right. There has been a long, very long, my neighbor was on the school board in the 90s, and there was a lot of tension between the school board and the township back then as well. And it's been longstanding, but I will say on my behalf and on, you know, Andy's on this call. Dan, I didn't realize you had joined. Dan is on this call. We have been working and really trying to improve those relationships. So we may not be there yet, but please know that we really are trying to make it better. So that we're moving in the right direction. It may take us a while to get there. I'm just being honest, right? But we are working together and really trying to move in the right direction.
There are very well, I'm sure a lot of people know this, they're very well-trained psychologists who work with groups like these to help them improve the way they work together. And it's the only way that and unless these two bodies work together, we're going to continue to have overcrowded schools because of what the commissioners are approving with the planning departments. And we need to plan together. And there are good psychologists who work with businesses all the time and groups like this who can help. And I mean, I, for one, would like my tax dollars to go to that, not a lawsuit.
I'm going to get Phyllis next because I think that Linda's comments just should be left right there. It's perfect. Go, Phyllis.
All righty, thank you. First, I just had to say that even if we think we're not in politics, we are all in politics because the people who we elect or we don't elect are making political decisions that affect us every day. So another thing is that it seems to me that if a community like Lower Merion, which is at this point strongly majority Democratic, and I will make the assumption strongly believes that there is, you know, the climate change is really happening and that we need to address it. If a community like Lower Merion cannot just sort of just say, this is the line, we won't do these things that are damaging to, you know, that contribute to climate change, then I don't know what community could. So it just seems like that would not be an unpopular decision in Lower Merion. And that we have to remember these are kids, and things are, you know, that this is the school board, and let's think in terms of educational opportunities, you know, that whatever, you know, I think it's great. There's all these creative options. Let's look at them. There's not going to be ideal options. And then the kids can be told, you know, this was a consideration, but the leaders in our community decided not to do it because climate mitigation is a big priority. It's an important thing. And sometimes that's what matters most. Everyone's common good is what's most important for the future. This is your future. You know, so that's a positive way, I think, to approach a less than ideal solution. And then as I wrote, I don't know if people have been looking at the chat, but that, you know, I've lived through the precedent of having kids involved in a sports team through the Lower Merion School District that did, but believe me, not get the ideal solutions that it was seeking for in terms of playing fields. And that's the ultimate teams. There were boys and girls who wanted to start an ultimate, a middle school ultimate team. Still doesn't exist because there's no fields for it. And so my kids and their friends waited till high school. Even in high school, even though there were as many kids playing ultimate as there were playing soccer, they were just the bottom of the list about, what fields were available to them. And believe me, I know they played all sorts of places at all sorts of times of day and night. And the kids played because they loved the sport and they wanted to play. And lots of them went on and played in college. So it did not damage them to not have the perfect ideal conditions for their sport when they were in middle school or even in high school. And we just have to, keep our priorities, at the top of our decision making. The most important thing is not having the perfect, precise dimension field for middle school baseball. It just isn't. And anyone who argues otherwise is just not thinking straight, So that's we just need to be more creative and, just look around, and that's just how it will be. Make our commitments.
Thank you,
priorities.
Deborah Robbins is next, and then after that we have Kelly.
Thank you, Adrian. I think that I did put some of my comments in the comments there. I think that I want to, first of all, agree with what Phyllis is saying, that the imperfect setup, the kids survive and thrive regardless. My kids are grown, but I know that we didn't have ideal setups for their sports participation either. It took effort and time and cooperation and parents working together. But I think that there's this, we need to slow it down, since the township is clearly working very hard to find alternatives. And my perception, and please, if I have it wrong, that the school district is not part of that effort or even is resisting that effort. It's not, I see that as not being in the best interest of all of us. And when I say all of us, I mean the children and everyone in the township. And I keep backing up because this is what, I don't know politics, and I never ran a school district, but in terms of health issues, and I was educated by spending some time with the people in COM and reading and taking it forward in terms of the environmental damage that we're really not getting into the details here. And this is probably not the time to get into all of the nitty gritty, but it is catastrophic, profound, and worst of all, not reversible. And when I have patients sitting in front of me and we say to them, we don't know why you can't conceive. We don't know why your pregnancy went wrong. We don't know why your child has developmental disabilities. A lot of it has to do with the environment, and it's all documented, and I can send you my files. And this is part of the problem, that this is being looked at in a 20th century sort of style. We need to be way past that. We need to back up and say, wait a minute. It's not just about, and I love the kids today, don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-kid, but we got to think about their moms and the future kids, and what are we doing to the environment where these future kids are going to be affected by what we're doing right now. So that's the short version. So that's my piece. I think we need to slow it down, maybe temporary solutions until we can come up with better solutions for the long term, a few Band-Aids, a few bridges, rather than, knocking everything out and not being able to, put Humpty Dumpty back together. So.
Okay.
So can I respond to that a little bit? So first, I want to respond to this idea that the current plan is perfect. As I stated at the very beginning of my comments when we started the call, this isn't a perfect plan, right? The location isn't perfect. It isn't perfect. And honestly, like, if in a perfect world, a lot of these things would look very different. So I don't want everyone to walk away thinking, well, this current plan is the perfect plan, because it's not. And to think that there weren't already compromises made and that there can't be compromises moving forward. And I also want to sort of address, and Andy and Dan know this, Peter and I and others on the school board as well have spent many, many hours. And I'm sorry that people believe that the school board has been not doing anything. I mean, I spent 2 hours with Nancy and Sean on Thursday afternoon. I, was with Andy on via Zoom on Monday looking at different ideas. So Dan and a group of us met, I think maybe it was 2 weeks ago now. So there have been ongoing and constant conversations. And I say this as someone that is doing this as a volunteer. I don't get paid, and I'm spending 2, 3, 4 hours a day on this, on school board things on this. I'm spending my Sunday afternoon here. So I just want people to know that the school board is actively spending a lot of time on this and is working with different people. So I really don't want people to think that we're just sitting back and doing nothing, because I'm sorry to hear that so many of you have that opinion of us.
Okay, what I would like to do is
I was next.
Yeah. What I would like to do is have Kelly speak, and then Dan has his hand up, and then final closing from both Andy and Lucy, because we're inching in on 4 o'clock, and this like I said is being recorded. I'll have a copy of the chat. I will take it, clean it up, because it just comes in as a text file, and have that sent to the school board candidates, and commissioners and commissioner candidates. So everyone will get to see that with again with a copy of the recording. So.
Thank you. You ready? All right, thank you. I have many notes written here, so I will try to keep them brief, and so it might sound jumpy. And I won't rehash some of the things that Linda, I was going to speak to kind of what you had brought up about the board, the board and the township. They're co-bodies of governance, and they're 2 separate entities, and it's a shame that they haven't been able to work together in the past. And if you remember, Andy, when you were either first elected or campaigning, you came to my home, we had this conversation, because I've been following obviously the dynamic of the 2 for a very long time as a member of this community, and for just to show where my perspective is, which is in the minority for this group, not to say that we are not also potentially in a majority, but anyway, as a parent of 2 children that will go to this middle school, as an employee of this district, and as a person that lives in the neighborhood of where the school and the fields are going to go, I do applaud the board. I think they have been transparent, which is why I put in the chat the documents that go back to 2012, as they have been searching for solutions for the overcrowding and for the fields for well over a decade. So it is unfortunate that I think some of that was delayed because of the lack of a relationship between those 2 bodies. And I do think there is a better relationship now, and I think they're, it's good to hear that Lucy and Peter and Andy are working together. But it goes back to, there are competing interests in this district, and there's going to be a group of people that are unhappy with the decisions that are made. That is inevitable. I would like to see the community view the building of these fields, which the township has also conceded, and let me know if I'm wrong, Andy, that the township is in need of more fields. Right? So I think it's great to come together and to listen to all these potential solutions. But as Lucy even said in the beginning, and they said in the board meeting, in the previous board meeting, if there are viable and available options, the board has been more than willing to take a look at those options, and as is indicated with them being here today. But that's the problem. They have to be viable and available. And that's been their roadblock for well over a decade. No matter who's putting it up, a private owner, can't be eminent domain, the Board of Commissioners themselves. And so now here we are. And there has to be a solution, and we can't just keep putting a Band-Aid on it. So I applaud the board for their focusing on what's good for our children in this district as well. I wish that the fields were viewed as an asset and an opportunity for this district, because I understand, and I'm empathetic to in talking about the environment and the impact that will have. But there's also other impacts that we have if we can't offer the programming to our children in this district. So there's competing interests. I think, when you say look at the bigger picture, as somebody did in the chat, well, we all have a different picture, and that's where that comes from. But I think the district has been more than willing to have an open mind and to look for solutions. But I think ultimately, if this is the correct solution, then I'm all for the board moving forward for what's in the best interest of my family, and I think many families in this community. But I do thank you for the opportunity to have a meeting like this for the community to come in, because I think that's very important.
I muted myself.
Could I make a quick?
Thank you, Kelly. I just want to, something that I've been thinking about, when the original plans for 1860 came out, there were fields on that property. What happened? So you can do that in your closing. I just wanted to get that in. Dan, or unless somebody Lucy or Andy had something.
Peter was going to jump in, I think.
Peter.
Yeah, I just wanted to, a couple of people have mentioned pausing until, a better solution can be found. I just wanted to talk about, Lucy and I both agree on this. Our perspective on this is that we're definitely open to considering all options. We're spending a lot of time on this, but we have to do that in parallel. The new middle school is going to open in 2 years. And we need to have fields available. Now, the current solution is nobody's top choice. It's not even, the district's not the district's top choice either, but we do have to have a solution available for them. And so as even just a contingency plan, we know that the process to move forward with all the approvals and everything, it's going to take a long time. So we have to keep that moving. And that's why we're continuing. If something better comes available, of course we'll pivot. Absolutely, we'll pivot. But barring something viable, we can't pause on the hope that something might come up. If something were to come up today that looks viable, we will pause. But until that thing is unearthed and something, at least an inkling of something, becomes known, we have to move forward with the approval process. The shovels won't hit the dirt for a while. We do have some lead time, but the process itself will take a long time to get there, and that's why we can't pause. But we are continuing to work in parallel.
So if I can just make a comment on that, and Peter, thank you for that. And I think it goes to Kelly's point, and you're absolutely right, Kelly. The relationship has improved dramatically, and we've had great conversations between the two boards recently. But I think what we run into is looking at things and having different priorities from each other. And I completely get what Peter's saying about working in parallel, but from my perspective, this plan is a bad plan. Period. End of story. The one that was submitted for 1835. It's a bad plan. And unless, to continue moving forward with a bad plan, knowing that it's a bad plan, saying, this isn't what we want to do, but it's really our only option. To me, it's my perspective, and I have a different role in our co-equal governments than Peter and Lucy have. But from my perspective, moving forward with this plan doesn't make sense. And it's something that, we should say, hey, this is not the right way to go. It's never been the right way to go. It shouldn't be the right way to go. And let's focus all of our energy on coming up with something that is either 100% the right way to go or 90% or whatever, however we get to that right answer. that's where we should focus. We should say, you know, I think everyone on this call thinks from an environmental standpoint, this is truly problematic with the plan that's been submitted. And, you know, moving forward with something we know has huge problems is, you know, to me is problematic. It's not saying that the relationship's not there. It's not saying the conversations aren't there, that we should continue moving forward that way. But I think we're coming at it from very different perspectives. And that's what's causing, I don't even want to say the tension, that's causing, you know, some of this difference in opinion here. It's not a lack of relationship at this point, though it may have been through the years. It's a lack of, or a difference of perspective. And that's kind of where I'm coming from on this.
Yeah, if I could just, you know, I'm not saying that it's a good plan. I agree that it has significant downsides, significant. That being said, right now, it's the least worst plan. So absolutely, like if there was an even slightly better plan that was viable, we could pivot. But right now, it's actually the best option, unfortunately. You know, I'm not happy about that. I'm not, you know, I wish the situation were different. So absolutely, Andy, what you're saying is true. It's absolutely true. But what's the alternative? That's the problem. And, you know, it's not a short-term thing. This wasn't like the first option that was available and settled. This has been years and years and years in the making. And even with all that effort, it's still currently the only option. So I'm happy to continue to work on this. Lucy and I, you know, continue to work with you, continue to work with community groups, continue to talk to people, and we're trying to unearth anything that could be a viable alternative. And if when that comes up, we'll be happy to pivot. We'll be happy to. But right now, there has to be a contingency plan for the students.
So
it is not a good plan, but it's the only plan.
Right. So with that said, you know, some of the issues we've heard, you know, with, for example, polo fields with the buses having to be on the street in front of people's houses, with, you know, Lafayette, now you're busing people to different sites. That's also not an ideal plan. If we had, you know, if we split it up into 3 or 4 sites, it's certainly not an ideal plan. But if we're looking at it as the alternatives, I think there's 2 ways to look at the alternatives. One is to say, hey, these alternatives have problems because it's too far from the school, or it's, you know, in 3 different spots instead of 1 spot. So they don't work because they have problems. Or if you say, here's the alternative and it has these problems with it, and here's 1835 and it has these problems, which is better? I'd rather have the site where we're going to 3 different places, or somewhere is 5 minutes instead of 1 minute, or 8 minutes instead of 3 minutes from the school. If we look at it from that perspective of, okay, here's plan B, and Peter, you're absolutely right. We don't have that yet, but I think we will, based on these types of conversations that we've had with the community and with each other over the past, you know, couple of weeks, that these solutions are going to be here. And the question is, do we look at them as, okay, here's the flaws in these plans, therefore they don't work great? Or do we say, well, there's flaws in it, it's better than what we have, so let's scrap what we have, let's take this and then improve upon this? And I think we're all saying the same thing, is let's move forward with something better, and try to find the solution. And in that, there are going to be lots of things that have to be worked out. There's financial issues, there's environmental issues, there's all kinds of issues. But let's find a better plan as a starting point so that we can scrap this and then move forward with that alternative, and build upon that and make that better.
I am, Dan.
We're in complete agreement. Complete agreement.
Okay. Dan, I'm going to call on Lucy because she has to leave, and then you and
Dan can go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dan.
I will be very, very quick. Sometimes we reach the point that everything that needs to be stated has been said, just that everyone hasn't said it. So I'm going to resist the temptation of getting, I was going to say into the weeds, but that may be too much of a pun on the specifics of this plan, And then, but there's one aspect that I wanted to address because the comment's been made several times about communications and cooperation between the two boards. And I want to echo something that Lucy pointed out. Her predecessor and I resurrected what was known as the Intergovernmental Committee so that the school board and the township board and Narberth would meet regularly, have discussions amongst ourselves, and then field questions from the public at large. And then from that, there'd be different groups depending upon the topics that may speak with one another. In this particular situation, I know Andy, along with Commissioner Courtney, have been meeting with Lucy and Peter on a regular basis. And Lucy noted probably very modestly the amount of time that they have spent, working on this and trying to discuss matters. We then all met, the same group of us, of both school board members and commissioners, as well as our respective staff. Some attorneys were there to go ahead and continue to explore what are the viable options that are out there. So I point that out so that people will know that the two boards, which have different jurisdictions by statute, sometimes find they overlap when it comes to land use. We may not see things the same way, but we have found a way that we can agree and disagree, but we're not about to become disagreeable. I will state that when things wind their ways into a courtroom, it is disappointing, I think, by all of us that becomes the necessary way to reach a resolution. But occasionally, that's what's required to answer questions that we see differently. We try to avoid that because, yes, the school board and the board of commissioners all get their tax dollars out of the same wallet, and we don't lose sight of that, whatsoever. So in this situation, it is difficult. We all probably, if we could, turn back the clock, would love to see this school being built on the St. Charles parcel, but those efforts, are behind us. So we are where we are, and we'll continue to work through this. And I think all of the comments that were made here on this, and Adrian, thank you for putting this together, are very, very helpful. But if there's one positive takeaway, I really want you to have that, while Ms. Pitt, I appreciate your comments, and many of them are spot on, we really do make that good faith effort to communicate with one another. But again, sometimes we just don't see it the same way. But it is in good faith that disparity, comes forward. And hopefully in this situation, we'll continue to do something and see if we can get a plan that we all can, be a little bit more comfortable with than the one that seems to be currently on the table. So Adrian, thank you. And then also to Lucy, Peter, and Andy who are here, again, I know that they're not going to stop once this is over, and everybody's comment is really taken a great value, and it's appreciated. Thanks.
I would like to ask, when is the next intergovernmental meeting?
I don't think we have one scheduled at the moment. I think that COVID and all of the meetings have,
okay.
Yeah.
All right, so.
But it's not to say that there isn't one that is due to happen.
Okay.
We are absolutely due for one, but there is not one. I just wanted to take a moment and follow up on some of the comments. I wanted to address the sleep issue. I know Dr. Tolan had asked about that. I thought Lisa answered that very well. Lisa and I've worked closely for many years on changing school start times. It's something that I'm very passionate about. I think that we need to be doing and have spent a lot of time on that as well. And the issue with having sports then before the school day, if we push back the day until 9 o'clock, nearly 60% of our high school students participate in sports. So while we would be pushing it back, the vast majority of our students then wouldn't get the benefit of that time change. So I'm not sure that, from my personal perspective, I don't think that's the best way to go, because it doesn't really solve the problem, because you have so many kids that would still not get that benefit. And the last thing I wanted to say, and so I appreciate all of the suggestions and the ideas. I hope that if there is a different solution, if there are other ideas, to recognize that those other plans and those other locations are also going to have their challenges. And I hope that if we are able to move forward and we do find another opportunity, that you all will support the school district when we make that, because those communities may also not like what these options are, and especially around the busing, right? When we start talking about busing additional kids to farther distances, it's probably going to mean more buses, and more buses means we need more bus parking. So I really hope that those of you that are very passionate about this and are working really hard to find alternative spaces, I hope when the time comes that we can count on you as well to support us when we need to find additional buses parking. So thank you.
I want to just thank everyone for coming and taking their time and bringing this out. I think people don't go to the commissioners and the school board meetings as much because they don't have the same chance to speak as they did here. So we will do a part 2 of this. I'll get with the commissioners and the school board and try and find another good date to do this that works for most, and we'll do a part 2. And meanwhile, everybody keeps scouring the maps, trying to figure out some ideas that can be thinking outside the box. That was my campaign slogan when I ran for school board, thinking outside the box. So I'm hoping you guys enjoyed this. Again, it will be, it's recorded, and I thank you all for attending. It's now almost 4:15, and just thank you for all this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Bye, everybody.
Bye.